3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
It's Monday. It's Monday. It really is. 7 o'clock. And that can mean only one thing. It's time for Reading the Signs, where me, Comedy John Ryan, and my comedian pals from all over the world are going to be talking about comedy, well-being, why we do it, how we cope. And that's where we need your help. We need you to send us your top tips for well-being. Be part of the show. Drop a comment in the box on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on the mensradiostation.com website. It's going to be a great show, much better than last week. What we're trying to do is think exceptional, which, funnily enough, is the motto of WJ, our show's sponsors. WJ are the UK's leading road marking and highway maintenance company. They're working with us, we're working with you. Let's get to it. Hello, we are here. Welcome along to Reading the Signs with me, John Ryan. It's Monday night. So as usual, I will be joined this evening by one of the top comedians from the UK comedy circuit. This guy I'm a big fan of for a number of reasons that will become clear as and when you talk to him. As usual, do let us know that you're there, that you're listening. Drop any comments that you want to make into the box. Let us know that you're out there, really. Tell me how your week's been, what you've been up to, what's been going on since the last time we spoke. I've had a pretty hectic week, as always. I'm still building my extension. So we had a few days, myself and Darren give me a hand last week. Thank you very much, mate. Did a big gig on Saturday night in central London for the Jongleurs chain, who are trying to get back into the circuit. A guy called Kev Alkian, a fantastic guy, a good friend of mine, and Marilyn Nelson, trying to create work for comedians. But I know that not everybody's got work, so things are a little bit tough, can be a little bit tight. We've also discovered in this house, and we've been ruined by Naked and Afraid. And if you have not seen it, you've got to watch this program. Unbelievable. We will talk about it, I dare say, during the course of the show. As always, I'm looking for any funny stories that you've got, so do drop them in the box. Let us know. Don't forget, you can listen to us again on Monday morning at 7 a.m. Also on SoundCloud, on the Men's Radio Station website, on YouTube, on Facebook. You can just probably pop down your local pub. Someone will have a little bootleg copy on their phone, I dare say. But it's really important. Please give us a like or give us a follow, and do listen to the other shows that we have on during the week. The CBD shows is phenomenal, and Russ and Phil every day are worth tuning into just to see what Phil's fashion is going to be like. Got one move over. We've got Phil Dave and Russ Kane, of course, with his knowledge and grumpiness, I think is a fair thing to refer you to. So also we've got our sister radio station, women's radio station. So do have a listen to that as well. As ever, we're talking all things mental health. Tell us your top tips on well-being, your best gag, your best lie, story of the week. Anything you want to tell us about, do tell us about. At the end of the evening, we will be looking for your top tips. Second, I don't know what happened really. Oh, hang on, Eric's popped up. That was a bit awkward, wasn't it? So do let us know, do join in, do take part in the conversation, and do join in throughout the course of the show. Just want to let you know that Tasha will be downstairs in the box. If anyone got any questions or anything that you want to say or add, then do please feel free to talk, and know that she will be answering your questions. So tonight's guest, Eric McElroy, he comes from Seattle, and in my opinion, obviously, the greatest thing to come out of Seattle, apart from that film, Sleepless in Seattle. And then there's a tower, and then there's Z Nation. They go to Seattle. Other than that, don't really know much about the place. But he does do a phenomenal podcast called The American Exchange, which I would recommend highly that you all go and have a listen to straight after talking to me. So, just quickly recap. Anything you want to talk about, put it in the box or comment on our YouTube video or on the Men's Radio Station platforms. It will be great to have any of your thoughts, to share any comments that you want to have with us. So without much further ado, let me bring the man in himself, ladies and gentlemen. It's Mr. Eric McElroy. There you go. What a great introduction, do you think?
That was fantastic. But it's a space needle. It's not a tower, John.
It's a needle.
It's a space needle. It looks like a little spaceship. It was for the 1968 World Fair, some World Fair before I was born, barely. And I can't remember the year, but yeah, it's a restaurant and a viewing thing on a platform like a spaceship. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. Oh, there you go, mate. How long have you been in England?
21 years.
Mate,
I know.
That is some going. I commend you. And it's through choice. What brought you here?
Well, originally I had a job working in higher education, working for a university, and I had done a drama degree at university, but not really. I don't think I was very good at acting, and so just got real jobs, and then ended up in higher education, which led to a job in Germany, and then a job in London, and then when I did get here, though. I started the comedy scene, as you know, in the early 2000s was just everywhere. I mean, every pub had a comedy night. I mean, it was crazy. And I ended up in a comedy club and saw someone doing some stand-up and thought, oh, I want to do that.
I could do that.
So,
I could do that.
I could do that. And I was sometimes right and sometimes wrong. But yeah, it was utter chance. And I had no idea that I would be here for this long.
And are you glad you stayed?
Yeah, I genuinely enjoy it. I mean, when I go back to the States now, it is like going to a foreign country. Especially because my wife is from New York, and so we go out to Long Island, and they all talk with they're all proper New Yorkers. You know, her cousin was telling me once, he goes, "I'm a blue collar guy, Eric. I could never go to that London that you do. That's amazing. You go to London and you do these things. I'm just a blue collar guy." And I'm like, "Could you just keep talking? Because that is a phenomenal accent. Just keep talking to me." Because that's
quite scary. I'm not gonna lie, mate. That's quite scary, actually. I was getting ready to go. Okay, let's just
a blue collar guy.
Back off. So if she's from New York and you're from Seattle, surely you should have met somewhere, in I don't know where, Idaho or something.
No, we met here in London, actually. She had made the mistake of marrying an Englishman, which I explained to her was just not right. You need to come back home. And so after that, just worked out that way. But what's great about living here and then having family in New York and her family there and my family in Seattle is that our in-laws, the in-laws only met when we got married in England, and some of them have never seen each other again. So all of the interdynamic play that you sometimes get where families squabble and stuff, we get none of it. It's amazing.
That's not such a bad thing, man. That's not such a bad thing. So where was your first job when you came to England?
It was in southwest London, in Richmond. It was working for Richmond, the American International University in London, which is also one of the longest named universities in.
Were you teaching, or were you like doing admin or janitor?
I was doing administration and recruitment. So I got to travel for 4 years to the Middle East and South Asia to convince people to come to London to study at an American university. And so, because you did the gigs in like Afghanistan and Iraq. Did you do some of those? Yeah, I never got to do any of those gigs, but I was in the Middle East around the same time in the early 2000s working with potential university students. So
were you though, or were you kind of,
doing a little bit of, it was probably my passport was so thick with all the stamps that every time I did go back to the States, I was desperate for somebody to give me a hard time, and they never did. Which always kind of
were you kind of more sort of working a little bit behind the wire? Was it a front?
Well, it was. I mean, the only front that was there was that I got to stay in 5-star hotels for 4 years on somebody else's dime, and it was phenomenal because no one was going to the Middle East in the middle of the first Iraq War.
Funny, that, wasn't it?
Yeah,
not even Ryanair. That's always. I think that's normally a good barometer. If Ryanair won't fly there, I'm like.
But we were too naive to realize that our travel insurance was probably canceled, and we kept going. So I was lucky enough to get to go to Syria before the war, which was an amazing place. I mean, it's just so tragic what's happened there, because the people were lovely. Obviously, the government is a problem, but the people were fantastic. We had a 2-week holiday there, and it was one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
All inclusive? Was it all inclusive? Was it?
It was. Well, we had one of the the mom of one of our university students insisted that she give us a driver for the entire 2 weeks. Nice. And so we had this guy chauffeur us around all of Syria, but he didn't speak any English. So anytime we needed to go somewhere, we'd try to explain it to him, and then he would just call someone on his mobile and hand me the phone, and then I would say, we want to go see, this ruin or whatever, and he would then get the phone back, and then he would be explain in Arabic. So we were basically in Syria as two Americans alone, explaining to someone who we didn't know who it was where we would be every time and every moment of our trip.
And what year was this?
This was in 2003, I'd say.
And you never came close to being kidnapped?
I don't know if we were under government protection the whole time, or, I mean, basically, especially what we've seen in Syria is they weren't worried about us being there as tourists. They were worried about an uprising of the people. And when you could feel, I'm not one of those people who with lockdown here think that it's a great government conspiracy to take all of our freedoms. Being in a country that is actually run by a real dictator. And when the government comes up and you're in a public place, everyone starts to whisper and lean forward, and they don't want to ever criticize the government on the phone. That's a real problem, and there's things to criticize about what the government has done with lockdown and stuff here, but I don't think that that's a giant conspiracy to take away all of our rights and all that stuff.
It now.
Sorry. Is that what is am I? Oh, sorry. Is that what we're sorry. Yes, they're coming to get us. I just want people to come back to comedy clubs again. And if they have to do a vaccine passport, I don't mind.
Okay, that sounds fair enough. So tell me about your first gig. Where was your first gig?
My first gig, it was a woman. She was a Scottish woman named Louise something. I don't know if she was ever a pro comic or not.
Louise Stevenson?
No, maybe. Was she Scottish?
She was, full of energy.
Yeah, maybe it was. This would have been almost 20 years ago. So Does that sound about right? It was a little. Right. It was a pub in Clapham.
Did she have long, kind of light hair?
I think so.
It's hard to say though, isn't it? Because it's 2021 and you don't want to objectify anyone.
I think you can.
Was she very easy on the eye? Should we say?
Yeah,
very pleasant.
She, as I can recall, from 20 years ago.
She made me feel very cheerful.
She was lovely. So let's say definitely it was a Louise. Louise Stevenson sounds right. And I know some people do comedy courses and that kind of thing. Basically, I went from that point where I saw that first gig that was a new material night, and I thought I could do this. So then I spent about 6 months just going to watch comedy, mostly open mic nights. So probably should have tried to go to a professional show, but I didn't even know enough about the circuit or how to do it to know that. So we just pop up into open mic nights, and I ended up in this one at a little pub in Clapham, just outside of Clapham Junction or train station, and I ended up being the only punter that was there. And I remember Queeve McDonald was there, and maybe so a couple other people that I eventually knew and gig with, and he's now an established author and comedy writer. And they were like, "Well, we're gonna do the gig anyway because we just want to get on stage. Do you want to do it?" Because they said, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "Well, because I was by myself." Yeah, they're like, "Why are you here?" And like, "You're the only punter. Why are you here?" And I'm like, "Well, because I want to do this." And they're like, "We'll do it now." And I'd already written my first 5, but I was like the headspace. I cannot. No. And then Louise said, "Come back next week and I'll put you on." And I thought, well, this will be safe. There's no one here at this gig. It's a tiny room. I'll be fine. And I took the day off from work. I was so terrified and nervous. I remember spending the day walking around in a park somewhere, reciting the 5 minutes over and over again in my head, and thinking, well, at least there'll be no one there. But of course, I got there and it was packed, and it was full that week. And she put me on in the safe spot, opening in the second section, just that suite, the nicest spot when people have had their drink and relaxed and everything. And it went well enough to keep going. And I met Pat Monahan there, another fantastic comic. I remember him being there. Yep. And that was it from there. And then I died on my fourth gig was my first death. I can remember it.
Where was that?
It was in East London. It was like the Green Tavern or Green something. And I remember Gary Delaney was there, who obviously, fantastic comic.
Where's he now?
And, where's you never hear about him anymore.
Never.
And Mock the Week and everything else.
When I first worked with Gary, he was trying to do this style of, feed line, punchline. And he was trying to work out how much of it was down to facial expression, body language, and nuances. And he would occasionally go on wearing a cape that covered his whole face. He would just stand at the mic with his face covered and do these jokes to see if the jokes were strong enough. Honestly, see if the jokes were strong enough to get laughs on their own, or if people had to see his facial expressions and mannerisms.
Because Gary's somebody who's always taken because he was, if I remember correctly, he worked behind the bar at the LSE at the old Chuckle Club. And then eventually, and he started, I think, writing jokes for somebody, and he never would tell me who he was writing jokes for.
Yeah.
And it was the classic thing that he was giving them jokes, and whoever he was writing them for was saying they're not funny. And Gary's like, no, you're doing them wrong. Because he wasn't someone who I think wanted to get up on stage, because he really was shy at the beginning.
Yeah.
And, and that persona, obviously, but he was somebody who looked at, I think, the science of what comedy is, where I've never been able to be that analytical about it. But Gary's one of the nicest comics, because he came up to me after I died silence for 5 minutes. I remember yesterday I was there, and he came up and said, "You're talking too fast and you need to tell more gags." And if I were to look at probably my set from last week, I would probably have the same criticism.
Brilliant.
I haven't learned anything.
But did you ever get nervous going on stage?
Oh yeah, I was terrified. I remember seeing people who would be able to be having a conversation with you and then just walk onto stage, and just that, not being able to be in their head or anything else. And, if it's, when I was able to do that, obviously if it's something like the Comedy Store or a big gig, then that's a different kind of headspace. But, I can now be having this conversation, and that's that. I mean, that when that happens, I don't know where that click happens. And you go, okay, yep, I'm going to go on stage now. And then you just step out. And it's a great feeling to be able to just be, in that moment.
So just for people who are just tuning in or listening on the podcast or on SoundCloud, I'm joined tonight by Eric McElroy, a very funny guy, fine comedian and podcast host, just talking about all things comedy and well-being. Eric, I remember we done a gig in Winchester. And that was when you first left. I was first aware of the fact that you'd left Chubby Club and you'd gone into this kind of, you become an image-based comic, and you'd lost weight and you're all slick in your blazer and you've left the Fat Boy gang.
Well, he's come back again and gone a little bit again. That's been a roller coaster.
But what was interesting was that night on the bill was someone who then subsequently passed away on stage. And it was quite interesting that we were talking about your health and about how you'd stopped drinking. And I actually think you might have been camping with the family at the time and had popped in to do a gig.
Yep. Yeah, I've been known to do that. So.
I do have this kind of Aspergic streak. Don't panic. But and it was interesting then that we were talking about health. How do you maintain health given that you're doing stand-up? How do you find it difficult?
I think I have gone through. There was a point. Yeah, this was. I guess that would have been 4 or 5 years ago at least. Where my body was. I got to a point with my body where I was heavy enough that I had a belly button hernia. So it was kind of like my belly button popped out. I was done, wow. And so needed to lose some weight. And then and I still like to have a drink, but my problem is, of course, that is also then a gateway to late night snacking and eating and everything else. And I'm just one of those people with the metabolism that those calories will stay with me because they like me. So,
so it's medical, basically, is what you're saying.
Yeah, it's definitely. But so
my problem with drinking is that it's a gateway to abusive text messaging. So I tend to put my phone way away from where I can do it.
Yeah,
especially if I drink whiskey, because I can send some pretty abusive.
Really?
Oh my goodness, yeah. Because I do have, I try to be happy and upbeat all the time. But there's this little dark spot back here, and I do sometimes get a little bit irate and.
Because that's one of the things that you do. That is, you will give compliments in a way that most English people, at least that I've encountered, especially on the comedy circuit, don't. And I've been here long enough now that. I have a British passport now that, I have a proper, I will never say I'm English because I know I will never be accepted, but enough to go, oh, why is he complimenting? But you're so gracious and generous, and you always are, that it's a little bit scary.
Yeah, well, it's just that I like people and I like nice people, and I think there's probably about a 1-to-7 ratio of good people to people I wouldn't have the time of day for. Yeah. So I do kind of collect, nice people. I'm very quick. One of my tips on well-being, for example, is just to not have any toxic people in your life. And that's a real big, especially as men, it's very hard to get rid of men in your life as a man, because you can't say to your pal, no, we're done, mate. I can't take you no more.
Yeah. You have to make an excuse usually if you have that person.
They go, yeah, she don't
in your
like you,
life.
mate. I like you. She don't like you.
Exactly. That's what a spouse is for, isn't it? For any spouse. Well, we can't come over and it's just, yeah.
I remember very early on at a gig I was at, there was a notoriously abrasive, acerbic comedian who was just sitting there telling everyone what they were doing wrong in their lives and how he was better than them.
Mm.
And I sat down and I took a Daily Mail out of my bag and started to read Daily Mail. And he said, "Oh, here we go. Look, we got some right-wing fascist." And I said, "Are you talking to me?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Don't." And just carried on reading his paper. Well, he proceeded to tell the other lads what a waste of space it was because I was reading the Daily Mail. No sane person would ever read the Daily Mail. And then it was interesting because they kind of joined in.
Mm.
And then when he left the room, they said, "Oh, he's really horrible, isn't he?" I went, "Hang on. You were quick to join in with him to have a pop at me when why are you reading the Daily Mail?" I said, "Well, I was on the train. I picked it up. I read it. And I would read this. I will read anything. I'd read Mein Kampf. I'll read anything. It doesn't mean I'm going to be influenced by it. But I realized very early on that comics and that green room setting was full of people who didn't have opinions that they wanted to share. And the ones that did tended to be quite objectionable human beings.
Yeah.
But you were struck me as a nice guy, and that was one of your great features.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think that a couple of things that, that I think is true about what you said there is, and I think that this may have changed a little bit on the comedy circuit, but there was a lot of machismo in the green room before. And I think that the diversification of the comedy circuit, which I think is a good thing to encourage and support and important, even though we're two, older white males, I want to see more diverse comedy bills. I want to see different voices and perspectives. And I think the more that we bring that in is not at a detriment to us. It's actually making the night better and making comedy better. But it also changes that dynamic in the green room, when you have those different voices.
Let's go with that then, okay? Are you willing to give up anything to encourage more diversity?
I don't look at it as giving up. I look at it as making more space for other people. I think that's what you have to do. But yes, obviously that could mean maybe I'm not chosen for a gig that I would have maybe gotten in the past. And, if that's the reality of how the circuit goes sometimes, then that's fine. I mean, especially from a promoter's perspective, because I've run gigs as well, you have to make a choice when you're putting together a lineup. And I think because there are still fewer female comics and there's still fewer comics of color, you do maybe have to work a little harder to have a bill that is more interesting to your audience. And I think that's not a bad thing to do.
Because the gigs that I've done for you they're nice. You have a nice audience. I think it's a reflection on you as a promoter that they're nice.
No,
right?
it's luck.
So if you have a white middle class audience, why do you need to have a diverse bill?
I think because the diversity of it's just more interesting. I mean, if you have this, whether it's a diverse bill, whether it's this all the same voices from all the same background and all the same life experience, then why do I want 4 or 5 people that are just going to do the same thing? I don't need 4 guys or gals to tell me, to have an hour of a seminar on a subject. It's not a TED Talk. And so I think if you can bring that in, that's not a bad thing. So that's why, it's not a risk. I mean, I've been on bills and program bills that have, it's the old stereotype, like you can't have 2 women on a bill is kind of a classic thing that happened in comedy, or 2 people of color. Oh, yeah. But then you look at that bill and you got, well, then you have three old white guys. How is that? You can't, how do you tell them apart kind of thing is the thing that somebody famously said once about 2 acts of color on a bill. So, I mean, I don't feel like it costs me that much to make space for other people.
But if you're already trying to put food on the table, gigs are scarcer. Should you be punished for your genetics?
I still don't. I've had a lot of advantages because of those same genetics. And I just don't see it as being punished necessarily. I still think there's a merit. There's still people are trying to bring more different voices to comedy, but I still do believe in the meritocracy of it as well. So it's a tricky thing because the circuit that, of comedy that exists is not the same circuit that, when we started doing this comedy thing a long time ago. And it's got all these little tiny niches and bubbles and things, which is maddening and infuriating sometimes, because I think both of us would do well in every single kind of gig we could be in. That's the thing that we got when we came up in comedy. I mean, you were ahead of me on the big jungler circuit that you mentioned in the intro is trying to come back. It did prepare you to play any room, and I got to this. I was kind of the different waves of the junglers that sort of morphed over the years. But, the Birmingham junglers playing that room and getting those 300 people of hens and stags to all listen to you and focus on you, to get their attention when they're basically just there to, not necessarily comedy's not the first choice, but when you got all of them together, what a feeling that was and that was looked down upon by some people who looked at the circuit as not a skill. That was a skill.
What I always found fascinating was that jonglers were seen as crowd pleasing, hens and stags, the lowest common denominator, looked down upon by the comedy cognoscenti, as it were.
Yeah.
They jonglers was the only lineups where you would get 3 black acts or 3 women, and they would do that consistently. And it interests me because I know you to be a fair person, so I'm quite happy to forego some work if it means a fairer society. That's what I think decency is all about. But it fascinates me when I talk to people and I say, yeah, all right, so you okay, you're supporting Black Lives Matter, you're supporting diversity and feminism, but are you willing to lose a quarter of your gigs to allow more black and female actors to come forward? And then you kind of go,
Well, I mean, it's kind of happening, whether I want it to happen or not. I mean, I don't want to lose work, obviously, but I'm not going to stand in the way of that. Just that natural progression. And hopefully, I mean, I dare to have a little bit of optimism as the circuit comes back after the pandemic, that people will be hungry for live comedy again and want to get back out, and that, when it's safe to do so, and as it is safe to do so. And, thank goodness we have such high vaccination rates in the UK. We're the third Western at the moment. We're behind Canada, which I don't like being, but whatever.
How can you be behind Canada or anything apart?
I know. Canadians, but and then I think Israel, and then us in the UK. So that means we can hopefully have safe live events. I think people are going to be hungry for it for more than they have been in the last 10 years when there was, the circuit kind of fell apart. So and then there's more. And so my answer to it would be, rather than me hopefully having to give up a gig, would be, let's make more gigs. Let's have more things happen, more opportunities happen, and people come to comedy, please, dear Lord, if you're listening, come to live comedy.
Do come. So how do you cope then when because you've got your family, so you're balancing the dad thing and the late nights, and how does that work out then? How do you make time for events, parties, and? Yeah,
I mean, having the forced evenings in of the lockdown, there's been some definite family benefits for that, and having Fridays and Saturdays, even though they're kind of blurred into every day of the week at different points of the lockdown, because as my children are now in their early teenage years, so when they were little, when they'd be going to bed anyway at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, what I got was, I was a dad on the school run. I was there to go to I was able to go to school events, and that I might be tired on that school run because I'd driven back from Sheffield the night before. But my, that was to have that presence where I would literally see, sometimes I'd be walking, because I live in Southwest London, I'd be walking to the train station at 6 or 7 at night to go to a gig. And I'd be seeing the dads come home from the city, and I'd know that we'd just put our kids to bed. And so I'd know they were coming home having not seen their kids at all, because they'd been at that 10-hour job. Yeah. And so, but I'd been there for the school run, and I'd been there for, changing nappies and that kind of thing. So I felt lucky in that sense. So I like that. Flipping that, I think was made me really close with my kids.
That's a nice one. And you make memories. You always struck me as someone who makes memories, and like I said, you go camping and then you go do a gig in the middle of your holiday. Yeah. So you still got to put food on the table, but you're still making time to make those memories. How did you cope though with, like, let's be honest, being an American, not the easiest accent to have, especially in a British audience, given that most acts go, any Americans in, let's talk about them.
Yeah. I think as long as I could quickly establish that I knew how to make fun of myself, and that was very quick. That was quickly my way in. Acknowledge it's America, and it's a bit that for me was the strategy that I cope with. I know some comic like Dave Fulton, who's a brilliant American comic, he goes full in with bravado, and he's a very big, like, whoa, come on, bring it sort of person. That's not my persona. So I went more low status and then would prove that I could make fun of myself, make fun of Americans, and then I was able to then dip in and make fun of the Brits a bit.
Dave Fulton, he was the last person I ever paid for a ticket to go and watch a 1-hour show.
Yeah,
he was always one of my favourite comedians. He disappeared for a few years, but I used to, when I first started doing comedy, there were a few acts that I was kind of in awe of, and Dave Fulton was one of them. And I remember going to see his show before I started doing comedy, and it was the last time I paid to go. And I'm just thinking, this is like playing football at Old Trafford. I'm just going to be playing at Hackney Marshes. This is just like, wow. And then when you get on the bill with someone like that, you're like, Steve Hughes was another one. Great comic, and you just watch them and go, I can't do that. But then you realise, actually, not everyone wants that. Everyone wants a little bit of something a little bit different than that.
Yeah.
But the amount of times I've seen comics go, the Americans in, and just lazily really, you go, for God's sake.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Come on. Do you know, is there a difference between, do you think, American humour and British humour?
Well, I think I think it has changed slightly. I mean, I never did stand up in the US. I did maybe 2 new material nights. So barely any real stand up in America. So I am essentially a British comic, I suppose. And but I just liked the feeling here that you could say anything. I mean, I remember Dave Fulton saying to me once that this was Iraq war time, George W. Bush, and post 9/11, that he was in America and he was getting banned from gigs because he'd criticized the president. Wow. And here, I think criticizing the government, at least especially at that time, was that was expected. In a way, it wasn't about a left-wing or right-wing thing. It was about taking on the power of the day. So it wasn't, now it's become, there's a lot more about being right-wing comedy and left-wing comedy, and that's a whole different dynamic. But I found that I liked just that sense of humor, that the taking the piss is brilliant. And it's something Americans often don't do. But I had that in me from somewhere, and I would speak that way in America, and I would annoy someone, whereas here it made them laugh. And I was like, this is where I need to be.
Yeah, I like I say, I've been to America a good few times, and it does always strike me as there seems to be more of a sincerity gap. I think is the biggest. Like I always, when I go to the shop, I buy stuff. I say thank you. Look, stay safe or have a nice day or whatever. Yeah. And very often the cashier will go, "What did you say?" I said, "Oh, you know what? Have a nice day. And, stay safe." I'm like, "Thank you." And when I go to the doctors, before the doctor asks me what's wrong with me, I'll say, "Hang on, how are you getting on?" And I once said that to a locum doctor who proceeded to spend 15 minutes telling me about how she hated the job and it was just so much work. I was like, all right. Anyway, why are you here? I went, well, I've got blood coming out of me. I've got a plaster on that. What about yourself? But it's that kind of sincerity thing. I went into, I think it was, it might have been Bloomingdale's, one of the big stores, and I bought this packet of chocolate biscuits. They were reduced from $20 down to $10. And the guy, a friend of mine I was staying with, and I went up to the counter to pay for them. And this huge African-American woman, she's like, "Hey, how are you today, sir?" And I thought, what, I said, actually, I'm really horny. Excuse me? Yeah, I'm feeling really fruity, really horny. I'm here on my vacation, and I've had no action for a couple of weeks. I'm starting to feel it. She went, "That'll be $10, sir." And I just took the money and awkwardly gave me the bag with the biscuits in, and off I went. And then my friend I'm staying with, his kind of sister came to visit, had the biscuits. "Oh, these are really nice. They're from Bloomingdale's and blah, blah, blah. Look, we're having a little cook-up on Sunday. Why don't you come?" I'm like, okay. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll buy some of them biscuits. So I went again, but this time with my friend. And I said, "Look, we just pop in here and get the biscuits." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And I picked up the biscuits. And it was the same woman at the counter. And she looked at me and said, "How are you today?" And kind of in that moment I said, "Well, do you remember me from the other day? I was the guy who said I was horny." She goes, "Oh, yeah, I remember you, sir." I went, I'm not horny anymore. Look, I've met him." Just as a kind of joke. And he went, "No, don't say that, man. Don't say that. The guy's from England. There's something wrong with him, And I said, "What's the problem?" She goes, "You can't say stuff like that here. You're not in London. You say that, everybody laughs and jokes. But here, they won't know if you're being a racist or homophobic or if you're kind of trying to start a fight or you're going to offend someone." I was like, "Man, they're only a packet of biscuits."
Yeah.
But that was when I noticed first. This is probably about 2005, 2006. I noticed because we do tend to import stuff from America. And that's when I kind of noticed these tensions started to creep into the UK based on that sort of scenario where you can't say anything. You got to be careful not to upset, offend, or do anything wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, the American approach, I mean, here, I mean, what I loved when I first got here is you would say something that would kind of, be teasing someone and they go, oh, I'm going to get you a pint, that attitude. Whereas that would have, gotten me shot in America. It's like I'm much safer here. And I have healthcare. If he does decide to punch me, I'm covered.
So when you were growing up, did you have this dream? One day I want to live in England, Mary Poppins and all that stuff?
No, it was all sort of just, I was post divorce in the States. So I married my university sweetheart, which is something that all Americans do. Yeah, it's part of the law.
Mary Ann? Was that Mary Ann?
Her name was Mary. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And very close. There you go. And I think there were 7 couples that got married the summer after we graduated from university, and now 2 of those couples are still married. Okay. And then so that didn't work. Basically 3 years later we were divorced, and I was wondering what to do. And I had wanted to study abroad when I was at university, which is the classic American thing, but I didn't do it because I was dating her and she didn't want me to go away. And I allowed myself to go, okay, whatever. And, which is my part of that. And, so then I was like, I want to get out of the States. So then I ended up taking jobs outside the US and then ended up here and then didn't have any plan,
other than at university.
I studied theater. So,
goodness.
Yeah.
I'm going to go to England to study Shakespeare.
Well,
all that, Oxford.
All that stuff. But I mean, that was what kind of drove me to think, stand-up work. Because at the time, that's when I was doing the recruitment job where I was traveling overseas. I mean, I was spending 6 months overseas with the job I had. So stand-up was perfect because you could do gigs when you were in London. So I basically would land in from, recruiting students in Cairo. And that night I'd be at the Purple Turtle in North London.
Brilliant.
Remember the Purple Turtle?
First ever gig I did was at Purple Turtle, and the second.
And you kept doing comedy after doing comedy at the Purple Turtle?
I was only going to do 3 or 4 gigs. I never wanted to be a comedian. I've said this a few times. Never interested me at all. I thought comedians were all white, middle class, English ponces, basically.
Yeah.
That's as honest as I can be. And to be fair, I've already changed my views a lot on that over the years. But yeah, just people who I thought they were kind of a different breed. Like some guys are good at football and they become footballers, and other guys can fly a plane, and some are just but I never realized that it was a vehicle you could use to do other things with. Just to quickly say hello to anyone who's just joining us and anyone listening on SoundCloud or to the podcast. This is me, John Ryan, and this week I'm joined by Eric McElroy, talking all things comedy, and we're talking a little bit about well-being and anything else that comes up. So, do let us know what you think in the comments box or on the YouTube comments box or on any of the other mediums. Tell us about your podcast, Eric.
So, this is one of those things that came out of lockdown. It's hopefully a good thing. And I'd wanted to do something talking about, because a lot of my shows have been political for Edinburgh shows and that kind of thing. And a lot about American politics, but I've dived into, British things a bit as well. But it sort of fell into my lap with a friend of mine who's a producer named Mark Mercado. And he was looking to do something with American, and that was going to be a co-host. And then, because there was going to be a big name politician doing it from the UK, and it was going to be a short series, and he ended up not being able to do it. So we thought, well, we had the artwork, we had a name, and let's just try it and do it. And I started reaching out to some people in the States and was lucky enough to get some fairly big profile people that are movers and shakers in US politics. And we got to talk to Mary Trump, Donald Trump's niece, got to talk to the Mooch, Anthony Scaramucci, the guy who was the communications director for Donald Trump for 11 days, famously, and a former Republican named Joe Walsh, who's become out as a big anti-Trump person. So, I had done a podcast before with a guy who was a Republican here in the UK, a broadcaster named Charlie Wolf, and I liked the dynamic. Was obviously he was very far to the right, I was on the left, and I enjoyed it. And with this podcast, I would have wanted to also talk to some Republicans, but the problem is that the Republican Party has gone so far into la la land with, if you support Trump now, you have to support this lie that he lost the election. And so I haven't I haven't had that range of diversity as far as opinion on the show, which I read right-wing media. I think it's important to see, follow right-wing people, because I don't want to be in a left-wing bubble, and I try and get out of that. But at the same time, I also want to talk to people who aren't going to, lie about what happened and the reality of that election and things, because I think it got quite dangerous. There was an actual coup attempt against the government of the United States. So, so that part of it. But yeah, I've had some great conversations with people. Just the idea of it is me trying to find out what's happening in America. So,
who's the Alex Jones? Alex Jones,
Yep.
Martians are going to take over the planet, and you've got to
Yep.
drink my zinc water.
Yeah.
I started listening to him about 10 years ago because a guy called Tommy Campbell, who's a Canadian comedian that I travel a lot with, he used to listen to him. And one day I said, "Who's this angry guy that you're listening to?" He goes, "Oh, you got to listen to him. He's hilarious." And then I would listen to him and think, this man's head's going to explode at any second.
Yeah.
And then I discovered Ben Shapiro, and it just changed my life, because for the first year, honestly, the first year I listened to this guy, I thought he was a character. You know the guy that does, is it Jonathan Pye that does this? Our version. For people who don't know Jonathan Pye, he pretends to be a political correspondent and he talks when the camera's not rolling. Well, I thought Ben Shapiro was just a wind-up. I thought this guy cannot be serious.
Yeah.
But then as I've listened to him more and more, I realized that he's the sort of man who could argue any position with a passion and a fervor that even if you would go, look, the wall's green, he'd go, no, the wall is white. And he would argue with conviction and passion and power. And you could never change it. You could never change his views, never change his mind. But like if the wall was the color he said it was, I would go, okay, I agree with you. But I've yet to hear him agree with anyone.
Which is an interesting thing to do. I mean, I think that, if you, please listen to the podcast, but it's very much a conversation where I do want to talk. I mean, I talked to probably the most right-wing person I've had on there is a guy who's British, actually, who did support Trump, is a guy named Andre Walker. I don't know if you've encountered Andre before. And, we had a civil discussion because I think it helped that I knew Andre. I'd done some media appearances with him before. And, so I'm happy to talk to somebody who disagrees with me. And I want to hear that. And I'm not somebody who is, the problem, of course, if you're trying to get somebody to listen to something like a podcast now, it's much easier to take that far extreme opinion. That's what's driven probably Ben's popularity, is because he can argue that way. And I just can't bring myself to do that.
We don't seem to have that sort of, because we've got Farage, who just can't listen to the man. There's no, it's just not engaged. I worry that the right wing in this country will find a voice that genuinely is right wing and engaging, and will clean up. Because it's not. I know that Jeff Norcott has this kind of reputation for being, a white British Brexit conservative voter, but he's still kind of central to me. His politics are very central.
Yeah.
And then obviously Andrew Lawrence, bless him, for whatever's going on in the guy's head, is just not engaging. But I just think, we are so close to getting like a Trump-like figure. And then I think we're in real trouble. Well,
I think that, there are elements of, in one of the podcasts I spoke with Michael, his name's going to Goldblum. We talked about the similarities between Trump and Boris Johnson. And there's actually quite a lot of things there. They're both people who have struggled with the truth. They're people who struggle with fidelity. They're people who played towards policies they may or not really believe in to get to power.
They're both born in America.
Both born in America. That's right. A lot of people don't realize.
Always try and get that in. When Boris is talking about immigrants coming to this country, you go, hang on.
Yep. U.S. citizen until he relinquished it finally. I think I think he got rid of his, because when you're born in America, you're American, which is not the case in the UK.
Hell yeah.
So there's a lot of similarity. So Boris has been pretty Trumpy, to be honest. He just does it in sort of that Mr. Bean way.
That's what he bases himself on. What he did at first. My view on Boris is quite simple. He's one of these lads who we need someone to drive the bus, right? We've all had a drink. The bus driver's not here. I'll do it. Go on in, Boris. And he's driving the bus. And then after about 10 minutes, he's like, I don't want to drive the bus now. I want to be back there with you guys hanging out. And we're like, no, you're the bus driver. He's like, let's vote on it. And now we've all decided, actually, if we all vote for him, we're going to keep him driving the bus. And that's he's like the guy down the pub who will go, I'll tell you what I'd do if I was in charge. Yeah, I'd make everyone wear a hat. And that way, the hat industry would take off and that would create work. And we'll go on then. And then he's realized that you can't do it. So I've worked with him a few times, very charismatic. And again, that goes back to what I'm saying. I worry that we get a charismatic right-wing figure. And don't get me wrong, I'm just as averse to the extreme left. Anyone who's like, really fervent, just no, you want to go up the road, mate. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
You win me by your actions.
Well, the problem is if you have people that go into government, you kind of need them, I think, to be boring because it's government and it should be boring. But we also need to be engaged with it. But people don't get engaged unless the extremes are there, especially with social media now. Yeah. So, like the Biden administration is boring, which is great. Thank goodness.
Yeah, but he is a bit wacky, though, isn't he, old Joe?
Yeah, but that's the reason why the Republicans haven't been able to figure out how to attack him, because he's just he's like having grandpa in charge. And
will we ever get Tom Hanks as president of the USA?
Well, if he ran, he'd win by a landslide. Yeah. Well, these days everything's so left wing, right wing. He would still struggle, but it'd be pretty good. It'd be him versus The Rock, maybe. That would be a tough race.
Oh mate, it's showtime! Yeah. My friend Chris in New York, I'll often just message him going, why do Americans fear socialism and what is socialism? And he'll go, most of them don't know. They just are told socialism is associated with communism. Communism is associated with Dolph Lundgren in Rocky IV, and he was the bad guy. So therefore, they're the bad guys. And that and the Mighty Ducks.
And then originally Red Dawn, my generation's Red Dawn, not the remake. It was terrible. It's classic. Wolverines. Love that.
Do you think the other thing I've noticed coming across from America is this whole angst-ridden? So again, first time I went to New York, my friend, great guy. I hung out with him every day, and then one day he said, "Look, tomorrow I'm going to go and see my therapist. So if you want to find something to do," I'm like, "Oh my God, is everything all right?" And he said, "Yeah." I'm like, "Why are you going to see a therapist?" To make sure that everything's all right. And I'm like, that will never catch on in the UK. But now I keep meeting life coaches and motivational speakers, and everyone's trying to find and you've got to have an angst. And I think that's another thing we've imported. You've got a lot to answer for.
It is. I have been responsible ever since. I mean, I was responsible for the Iraq War. I was responsible for Trump. Lots of different things. No, I remember when I was working for the American University, and we had this is going back 20 years ago, and there was a girl who you go around the university and you get your keys for your dorm room and you get your class assignments. And then she popped into student services and she said, "Yeah, I'm here to get my therapist." And of course, it was British staff because it was American University, but British staff. And the woman behind the desk was like, "What?" She said, "Yeah, I need my therapist now." And she's like, "No, you don't. See the pub?
There you go.
Off you go." And that was it. That was a very, very different approach to it. But yeah, I mean, obviously you've done a lot about well-being and mental health. It's a good thing to acknowledge, but the obsession with it in the States, like I think, depending on what I had a family member who, they'd been seeing the therapist for like 20 years.
Wow.
And wasn't progressing in her happiness levels, in her wellness levels. And I'm like, this is not working for you. This is not what therapy should be about, unless you are significantly, obviously I'm not a mental health expert. Different people have different needs, but if you're still that deeply unhappy and this one person has been helping you all this time, is that the right dynamic? So if it's that idea that it's this crutch that's not allowing you to then get better and heal, then that's I think maybe not the idea. But obviously there's a range of different issues out there.
But then think about it. Do you want to cure people? Do you want to end, if we stop crime, the economy will collapse. We need the police, we need the judicial system, we need the prisons. What we do, everyone starts behaving, it will that's what we need to do, right? I do have a very poor routine about this whole thing about forget civil unrest. We want civil rest, and the whole thing will fall apart.
Yeah.
You order something on Amazon, it will come within 24 hours. Now, if everybody worked with that level of efficiency, the country would collapse. We can't do this.
Well, I mean, I think in a similar way, like when we lost the dynamic of the Cold War, and there was sort of that was an overall thing that for generations kind of bonded the West versus the East and gave you a very clear external bad guy. And then once that ended, we sort of looked within ourselves in the US and in the UK. And that self-reflection then starts to lead to some of the problems that we have now, because we don't have that. We looked inside, and then all of a sudden the government couldn't distract us with those things outside, not the government, but just in general. And I think that's maybe part of the reason we have some of the internal divisions that we have now. Not that we want to have, the threat of nuclear annihilation hanging over our heads, but it did lead to some great films.
Mate,
so,
and obviously some great songs as well. But,
yeah, exactly.
So bear in mind then that we kind of touched on it. How do you stay motivated? And given that you're an American coming, you're a white male, heterosexual, kind of depending on how many beers you've had. So I can say that. And we go, you're not going, oh, that's really. But how do you stay strong? How do you stay on top mentally? What do you do? What's your secret?
I think especially, going through, losing that the impact of a live audience, which, had, weekly, before lockdown. I think getting the creative outlet in other forms, thank God for the technology that we've had this year, to be able to do conversations like this. I did some Zoom comedy shows. I do a comedy YouTube show called Comic Solving Problems with Steve and Alan. And, we did that weekly, and have built up, a nice following for that, but it's hard when it's the same as on the live circuit. You create something that you think is good, and then it's about finding the audience. Like it was the same, when you do an Edinburgh show, you can write the best Edinburgh hour ever and have 3 people come. And, you can have that moment happen as long as you can get that feedback and have that conversation and you got those 3 people to laugh. That's great. But then you think, oh, how do I then deliver that to the next level? And that's always a challenge in any form of the arts, I think. But in lockdown, I was really proud of I still am really proud of the podcast. Getting to talk to people who are influencers or in the room. I spoke to a woman named Olivia Troy, who was Vice President Pence's assistant on COVID. And she was there in the room with Trump as he was rubbishing COVID and talking about hydroxychloroquine. And so, you get to have a conversation with someone like that. That's a privilege. I'm like, how am I talking to these people? So those kind of little victories, hopefully just keep plowing on. Wait for the big ones to come too.
Find something to do. And then as a dad, then how do you promote positivity in your children and resilience?
Well, I'm hoping that, they see that I'm doing something that I love and care about. And then that comes to them. My daughter's a fantastic artist, photographer, and she's just really intensely passionate and works at it. And it's incredible to see in a 15-year-old, a level of creativity that I couldn't achieve now. And that kind of thing is incredible to see in your kids. And you kind of think, I guess you create a platform and room and space for them to do things. And then when they start doing things that you have, no ability to do yourself, that's always incredible to see in your children. My son is good at sport. I am not good at sport.
Do they see themselves as British or American?
Well, my son, both of them were born here, obviously American parents, they have dual passports, but my son went to Church of England schools and have English accents and so on. But my son is taken to telling people that he was born in America, because he said it makes him more interesting.
Oh, so mate. That just shows how it's changed in 20 years, doesn't it?
But yeah, I think it's easy. It's a line. He hasn't started picking up the girls yet.
It's a line. Brilliant. I love it.
I was born in America.
I was born in the States, So when's your next podcast, and where can people hear the podcast?
The podcast comes out every week. It's on all of the platforms imaginable. So if you just look up Eric McElroy's American Exchange, check it out. I've been doing a deep dive the last 2 episodes, this episode and the one coming up this week, into Texas and the battle there for voters' rights, and the Republicans are trying to create a lot of barriers to that. I'm talking to 2 of the Democrats about what they've been doing to keep people voting, because that's like a good thing in a democracy normally. And then Comic Solving Problems, the show I do with Stephen Allen, we're sort of because I've been camping and he's done some holiday time in August, but that's normally weekly, and that'll be coming back weekly from September. So
brilliant, mate. Thank you so much. I could talk to you for hours. Thanks for joining.
It's been a pleasure.
Really appreciate it. And do please just share the next link to your podcast. Just share it on my Facebook page, and I'll push it around social media. Thank you so much for supporting Men's Radio Station and for coming on the show. We'll speak soon, mate. You take care.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, John. It's been a pleasure. Yeah. See you soon.
Thank you. Oh, I've got a line down the middle of my face. That was the amazing Eric McElroy. It's always really interesting for me that we have we have Americans, we have British, we're all from somewhere, aren't we? But ultimately, we all suffer and endure and live with the same things. It's interesting that we sometimes look to America for our leads, but over the last few years, I think they've kind of fallen behind a little bit with some of the kind of wilder stuff that's been going on over there. Over the weeks, we've been collecting people's top tips. I'm particularly taken with Kane Brown's "Be selfish and look after yourself." Rialina, of course, was talking about managing your energy and just have those nothing days from time to time. John Simmet was just all about trying to get your Wi-Fi to work. Our very own Steve Troop said it's all about choices. And Steve, for those of you who listen regularly, when he pops up from time to time, it is about good choices, bad choices. Dave Sleet talked about being the difference. Philip Simon last week talked about stubbornness. And Eric was quite interesting because he said, find something to do. Find something to do and push on with it. Now, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a practitioner. I'm not saying to you that if you are suffering, these things will help you, like Marcus Bergman's tips on, like, do yoga and eat well. What I'm saying is that if you are currently in a good place and want to remain in a good place, there are little things that you can do that will help you. And these things have been shown regularly to help people who are not currently suffering. Exercising regularly, acting, don't procrastinate, get a good night's sleep, try and get positive people in your life, try and remove negative and toxic people, try and find meaningful hobbies. They're all little things that we can do. But ultimately, if you're in trouble or someone you know is in trouble, what they don't need is for you to say, I'm here for you, mate. I'm here for you. Because they can't reach out to you. They can't reach out for your help. If you can't think of something nice to say, don't say anything. And if you can be of practical help to someone, do it. Look, if you can't get out of bed, I can't come around and talk to you and say, look, I understand what you're going through, because I don't. But if you are stuck, I'll come and make you something to eat, clean up your house, and help you with something useful and something that's going to allow you to have one less thing to worry about. If you or anyone you know is struggling with their well-being, their wellness, or their mental health, I always plug these guys, mind.org.uk, because no one has to face a mental health problem alone. I'm also a really big fan of Time to Change. If you know of any other charities or any other places where they've got some really great help or they can be of use, then please do let us know and we will give them a mention. I just want to give a big thanks to Men's Radio Station for giving me a platform to talk to people every week, but also WJ, who they do the road signs, the markings on the motorways and that. They are really good guys. They think their motto is think exceptional. And I think that's something that we could all do with trying out when it comes to talking about our wellness and our well-being. It's just about trying to realize that sometimes your darkest days will get brighter, and that there can be light at the end of the tunnel. But for a lot of people, it is very difficult. So once again, if you know someone who is in trouble, then get round there, ring them, knock on the door, text them. They might not answer you. They might not be interested in talking to you. But what they will do is when they get better, they will appreciate that during their tough time, you were there for them. So, just bear that in mind, because it could be us next. It could be me. It could be you. If you have enjoyed the show, do listen every Monday at 7 p.m. We can be found on Facebook, on the Men's Radio Station, on Twitter, just like everywhere, really. If you don't know where to look, you need to just have a little look at yourself in the mirror and think, ooh. But we do have all social media platforms. My own website is happytohealthy.com. Do tune into the Daily Show tomorrow with Russ and Phil from 11. That's always worth a listen, as are some of the other fantastic shows on the Men's Radio Station and on the Women's Radio Station. We're heading into August now. Lockdown seems to be behind us, but it doesn't mean to say that people are not still struggling. So if you do know someone who's struggling, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, just give them a call. Just do that one thing. Or just ring someone you haven't spoken to in a while, or reach out to someone that you think may be having a little bit of a tough time. I'll be back here again next Monday. You take care. Stay safe, everybody.
Well, that's the end of another episode of Reading the Signs with me, Comedy John Ryan. We're here every Monday night at 7 p.m. talking with comedians about mental wellness, mental well-being, and just trying to get the conversation going. What we're trying to do is show that it's good to talk, and we're also trying to show that everybody can go through the same experiences. A massive thank you to the WJ Group who sponsored the show, showing their commitment not just to mental well-being, but also to reaching as broad an audience as possible. It's great to be part of the mensradiostation.com family, so do check us out on the website, on social media. We'll be back next Monday. You take care. Stay safe, everybody.